The following program is presented by the Far East Broadcasting Company because stories of people living out the gospel with their lives inspire all of us. FEBC, taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. Learn more at FEBC.org.
Trust God, walk free, and don't be afraid. That's my motto, and that's what I did when I went home. I just told the Lord, you know what? I don't know what's coming at me. You do. Guide my heart, guide my words, And I said, I'm not afraid, and I wasn't afraid. And you walk into it.
As a young man, Ira Wagler left the Amish community where he was raised, but after many years, he returned home to reconcile with his father. Welcome to First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd, and we're going to hear Ira tell the story of returning home. Stay with us. Thank you for listening. First Person is now heard on over 400 radio stations, and many more of you are either streaming or downloading the podcast of this program. If you haven't done so as yet, you can download the free app, First Person Interview, from your app store. And now that we're beginning to travel a bit more, you can use the app to download interviews and take them with you on the go. Again, search for First Person Interview in your app store. And take a moment, if you will, to thank the Far East Broadcasting Company for making this program possible. FEBC's goal is to take Christ to the world through radio and new media. Learn more at FEBC.org. That's FEBC.org. Ira Wagler wrote a New York Times bestseller about leaving his Amish family, but since then, he's written about seeking forgiveness and reconciliation with his father. And that's where we began this interview.
This is the second book. The Broken Roads is actually a sequel to the first book, which was called Growing Up Amish, real simple title there. And that book came out 9 years ago and did quite well. Was a bestseller, and got my story out there. And in that story, it's simply it's the details of me growing up and then leaving, coming back, and eventually just breaking away, which it was fairly hard for me. Part of it is probably because as a storyteller, later in life I became a writer, and that sensitivity that you have to remember the details of a story is probably what made it really hard for me to actually break away, which did happen.
Yeah. Well, I think most people listening know what we speak of when we speak of the Amish community, but give us, when people just ask you, what are the Amish? What do you say?
Well, it's like you said, most people would have some idea, but basically the old order Amish, which is where I come from, and again, there are very varying degrees of those people too, from very strict to more progressive. The old orders basically don't drive a car, don't own a car, have a horse and buggy for transportation, and basically have no electricity and no telephones in the home. That's how it used to be, but anymore, in the last 10 years, the technology has invaded the community on many levels, and the iPhone is one thing that I think is going to drastically affect the culture in the next 10 to 20 years.
Is that right? I did not know that. That's interesting. Yeah. How old were you when you broke away, so to speak?
Well, for the first time, and that story's all in the Growing Up Amish, I ran away from home, which, the classic, pack your bag and leave in the middle of the night. 17-year-old, that's a kid, I was just a kid. But the drive in me was so strong to get out and see, what's on the other side, so then I left again and again, came back, actually in the first book, joined the church, was engaged to be married, and in my mid-20s then was when I just decided I cannot do this, and if I stay, I'm going to hurt a lot more people than if I leave, and I just left again, and left that devastation behind me.
Okay.
There was a lot of devastation there.
Then would you say you became a Christian after that fact?
It was in the process of breaking away. The Amish preached the gospel. I will say that. They preach Jesus, salvation by faith. They just have all these little funny rules that kind of tie in. And so it's not that I hadn't heard the story, and it's not that I didn't know the story, but there was a friend that I met toward the end of the first book, and he had joined the Amish from the outside, which is really rare. It's very difficult to do, but he had done it. He had married, had a family. I connected with this gentleman and developed a deep friendship with him. I could communicate because he was not from the Amish, so he could understand my frustrations. And that man led me to the Lord, and then once that happened, then I was free to go or stay, and I chose to go.
Well, obviously, the relationships in your family changed dramatically when you made that decision, and let's talk about that. You, as you said, you've written your story in Growing Up Amish and now Broken Roads, Returning to My Amish Father. So was your father the principal relationship that was broken?
Pretty much. And again, just to point out, Growing Up Amish is a story of a young man breaking away. Broken Roads is a story of an older, much more experienced and a person who's seen a lot, basically fighting his way back home, So it's like a big circle, But as far as the culture, I forget what your question was there, but you can jolt my memory again.
Yeah, your relationship with your father, was it the most difficult break for you?
Well, it was. Mothers typically, and my mom was no different, mothers just love you as much as they can. And in the Amish structure, as much as they're allowed to, mother, we were always welcomed and always loved by our mom. My younger brother and I had both left, and Dad was a primary figure. And it wasn't like we would go home to visit maybe at Christmas time, and maybe once or twice a year we just go for a couple of days. You don't stay long, because if you stay long, then that's things start to get tense. Just go in for a couple of days and then leave. And my father was, he was, you want your father's blessing. I don't care who you are, how hard your father was. Eventually, at the bottom, if we dig down there far enough inside the heart, that's what you want. You want your father's blessing.
Yeah. And
I went after it, and he shunned me for many, many years. And shunning in the Amish, it's kind of a misunderstood practice, I think. The real conservative, plain Amish are harsh shunners. You don't come home. You're not my son. I was more of a moderate, mid-level to more progressive peoples where I came from, and my brother and I were always welcome to come home. We weren't invited, but when we went, we were welcomed. We were always claimed as their son. As my mom and dad's sons, we were never disowned. But each time we went, there was always what I called obligatory admonition. You need to come home and straighten your. Dad just thought that you just had to do that. So that was always a part of the process as well.
Well, how did you live with that tension?
Well, it wasn't really tension. I mean, it was a little bit of tension. We were right in the process of it. Right in the middle of it. That's tension. But when I'm out back to where I would move to, Indiana, went to school in Indiana, South Carolina, then I moved to Pennsylvania. When you're out living life, it's not that big a deal. You just don't think about it that much. I mean, you want your father, you want your father to communicate and bless and all that, like I said, but other than actually going home and facing it, the tension was fairly minor, I think.
Looking back, perhaps from your father's perspective, what do you think he was going through during that time?
You know what? Those are hard things, because in the process, in the middle of it, you don't think about it. I just like, Dad, why can't you see what I see, and why can't you bless me like I want you to, but later, from this perspective, the second book is basically structured around the man got ill in 2018, late that year, and the day after Christmas, I drove up. He was staying up in Canada where I was born, that community. My oldest sister and her family took care of both of my mom and dad. They both are passed now, but in the day after Christmas, 2018, I drove up there. He was in a coma, and he was going to die, and I went up to see him and spoke to him in his coma and just said, this is Ira, this is all in Pennsylvania Dutch. A powerful scene. It's in the book. And I just told him, you have to go to Mom. You must go. And 2 hours later, he died. Those are powerful things. They're hard things and they're powerful things.
So do I understand that you really never received the verbal blessing from your father?
Well, I would say I received the blessing because the big part of the shunning equation for him was not eating with me. And so when I go home to visit, they'd have my younger brother never joined church, so there's no big deal. He could eat anywhere because he's not excommunicated, and I had been. And in the book, probably 3/4 of the way through, when I go home to visit, Mom had Alzheimer's for years, and they lived in a small, what they call Doty house, grandpa house. Mm-hmm. And my sister brought a large tray. It was a Saturday afternoon. I usually went up on a Friday evening, came back on a Sunday, just was there for a short time. And she brought a tray of food over and said, "Here's your supper. Just set it on the small table there." And this is a extremely moving moment for me. I went and sat down at the table. He got up. walked over to Mom, she's out of it, and then he came over and sat down at that table with me, and we prayed, and then we ate. That was his blessing. It was never verbalized.
I see.
But he would eat with me.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
So I know a lot of years had gone by. You left the second time in your 20s, you said?
Well, in the first book, the first time I left, I ran away at 17. I left again when I was 18, left again when I was 20, and then 20, in that process, the fifth time I left was the final time. So you can imagine, back and forth, and the emotional upheaval for the family and for me, each time, and then you still break away. And it was a lot of trauma that I caused that would not have been necessary had I known then what I know now. But I didn't know.
And how old were you when your father passed then?
Well, that happened in 18, so I would have been to 50. I mean, I'm 58 now. I would have been 2 years ago.
So a lot of years had gone by.
Yeah, about half my life, probably from the time that I, actually broke away. And those were long. When I was close to it, just coming out of it, there were walls and tension and arguing But as the years passed, what happened with him was as he got older, the fire, he just could not maintain the fire because it was too old. And that's one reason the walls came down, is because he could not maintain them. And you know what? I'll take it. I'll take whatever's there for a relationship with my father. I'll take it in whatever circumstances they come.
But I understand how life goes on, and you live decade after decade, and of course it's always in the back of your mind. It's not in the forefront, perhaps, but it had to be there at some level.
You mean as far as the reunification or that kind of thing? Or I mean, it was there, but when you're living, it's like, yes, I want my father's blessing, but it's not like you can't just sit down and plot for it because it's not going to work. You just try to live, and you try to work your way and work your way and work your way. Mom got really sick with Alzheimer's. She was in a coma for many, many years, didn't know what was going on, and I'd go up to visit. And each time things mellowed, each time he was, and in the end, he was glad to see any child that came to visit him, whether they were Amish or English. We called non-Amish English. So I'd be considered English now. But he welcomed us, everyone. He was glad to see us and told us so, and so those are memories that you can't take away. You just can't, those are real things.
We'll continue our conversation with Ira Wagler, the author of Broken Roads, coming up in a moment on First Person.
I so enjoyed listening to the message that FEBC shared on the internet recently. Although I cannot attend church or any meetings during this epidemic, I am finding peace and learning so much through your programs. Praise the Lord.
FEBC is dedicated to taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. To learn more, please visit febc.org. That's febc.org. The Far East Broadcasting Company, until all have heard. My guest is Ira Wagler, the author of Broken Roads, Returning to My Amish Father. It's a sequel to his book, Growing Up Amish, and we'll put information about the book and Ira on our website, firstpersoninterview.com. So when you returned to your father and he was ill and close to death there, what was going through your mind? And talk about the scene for me again, if you would.
Yeah, the scene is it's one of the more powerful scenes in the book. It's toward the end when I just, it's just like moment by moment me walking into the room. In a time like that, I mean, I knew when I left home and headed up there, I spoke to the Lord. I said, you know what, grant me these protections as I go up there, because I knew things were going to happen that I had never seen before. I mean, I could feel it, and walking into a time like that, you try to. I always say one of the mottos I try to live by: tell people if they want to break away from any culture, Amish or whatever your restrictive culture might be, is to trust God, walk free, and don't be afraid. That's my motto, and that's what I did when I went home. I just told the Lord, you know what? I don't know what's coming at me. You do, just guide my heart, guide my words, And I said, I'm not afraid, and I wasn't afraid. But and you walk into it. I mean, and some of that comes from experience, from years and years of walking into those hard situations. And this time, I knew there would probably be some resolution that he was not going to make it.
Yeah. Would you say that you always loved your father?
I would say I always did. I would not say that I always recognized inside myself that I did, but I always had very strong feelings, that I would, to get his blessing and approval. Those are things that every child craves. I don't care if you're a woman or a man. You want your father's approval, and mothers to some degree, but Mom was, like I said before, we were her sons, and she was never going to make it any other way, and she always let us know that she loved us, So that was a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about your mom and dad, your brother. How did the other extended family treat you during these years away?
At the very beginning, back in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, when I actually broke away, there were a few of them that were fairly hard, what I call hardcore Amish. They were pretty stickler for the rules. And again, as the years passed, there's 11 children in my family. I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters. And with time, even after I left, all of them except 3 of them stayed older Amish. All the rest of them moved on to some kind of Mennonite or, a cart where they drove cars. And our relationship was always, there was, early on there might have been some tension, but in the last 20, 25, 30 years, with my siblings, the relationship could not be better. We love each other, and we are there for each other.
Good,
and we let each other know that, and that's a blessing.
Ira, would you say that your faith in Christ is one of the things that led you to this reconciliation?
It has to be. I'm not... coming from the Amish, to talk about, the faith, I do that some, but that culture is a quiet culture. But the gospel, the power, the message of the gospel, what the gospel is, Jesus, all those things were huge factors. And you walk and your life is a mess often, that's just life. My life was messy in many, many ways. But you just keep walking. And yes, I give the fact that there was any resolution at all, I give God all the honor. It's Him, and it wasn't me.
Yeah. Well, central to the gospel is forgiveness. Talk about forgiveness. Who had to forgive who of what?
Yeah, that was an interesting question. I actually had that come up in a written form here, since the book came out. And what I would say to that is, my family, me and my family, we had to forgive each other. But I think I focused on my own flaws. You focus on your own flaws and you walk into a situation instead of focusing on theirs. I think forgiveness can come a lot easier, and I think that's what I did. I was more, when the time came, I was like, I want to do what I can, and not focus on the flaws of the father or my siblings, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It's you do that, your heart's open. I think the Lord can really bless that.
Yeah. Well, using the Amish for a moment as a type of restrictive community, and there are others, as you've already acknowledged, but is there help for people who want to break free of that? Did you find any help anywhere?
No. When I was young, and of course this was almost a generation ago, anymore in the bigger communities, there's counseling available. Like, it's not unheard of. When I was growing up, all that was just simply, it's like a strange language. You don't know it, you don't do it, nothing. And so now there would be more resources, but also to break away, I'm at the point now that if a person chooses to stay, and they make whatever. If you decide to stay Amish, I bless that. And if you decide to leave, and you're an adult, now if you're a teenager and like I was 17, I would not help a person like that because you're a minor,
Mm-hmm.
But if you're an adult and you want to leave, I will give you advice, but the choice always has to come down to the individual. Do I want to break away? Do I want to leave the culture? Do I want to leave my people? For me, the answer was yes. And then what happened was I still circled back around and still maintained my relationships,
Yeah.
It's hard to break away from a culture. It's just really, really hard.
Is there anything looking back that you would have done differently?
The primary thing that I think I would have done is it took me 5 tries to leave. If I had it to do over again, I would just simply say, Lord, let me get it done in 2, because the trauma of that, for me and my family both, of breaking away, going out, okay, he's out there now, and then for me to, okay, I want to come back and try again. And so everybody accepts you, and then a year and a half later, you're doing it again,
Yeah.
I have deep regrets for that, but it just was what it was. I can't help it.
I think any of us who make decisions at age 17 look back on it and think, we could have handled that differently.
Yeah. And especially such a radical decision as that.
Yeah, exactly.
No question about that. No
Yeah.
question about that.
So your mom died first and then your dad subsequently. What was your relationship and is your relationship with your family after they've passed on?
Oh, with all my siblings at the moment, like I said, 3 of them are still old order. My oldest sister my oldest that's part of the narrative too. My oldest brother Joseph, he's in the first book. He was actually an Amish minister. He had multiple myeloma, fought it for a long time, 10 years, and he passed away a year ago in March. So he passed away 3 months after my father did. That's not in the book. The book ends with my father dying.
Well, this is your second book about your experience, this one focusing on your relationship with your father. I'm just curious about the response from readers, especially to the first book and now this book.
Well, this book was just released. It's just entering the market, and of course, with this quotation marks pandemic or whatever, everything's kind of shut down. The first book was tremendous. It sold 185,000 copies worldwide, and I had people. It's in the back of the cover. It said, where I worked. I basically had people walking into the office from all over the world, Ireland, South Africa, whatever, clutching their book and asking me to sign it. And I was just thrilled, and the reason they came to Lancaster County because it's a big tourist attraction for the Amish, and since they were there, they realized, hey, I can go see Ira, and so that was a big thing to interact with the readers. Did a lot of online interaction. I'm on Facebook, and so I have a lot of relationships there that come from the first book, and I've enjoyed it all.
What is it about your story that draws people like this?
Well, part of it is a universal theme, I think. The first book was leaving home. The second book is going back home. And then, of course, you can't let out of the equation the Amish culture. And that's just, if you're in that setting, people are fascinated by them. They tend to put them in a pedestal. They're not, they don't belong on a pedestal, but they don't need to be criticized unnecessarily either. They're just people. They're flawed, and they make mistakes just like anybody else does,
Yeah.
Which I can attest to that because I did. I made plenty of mistakes,
Well, Ira, for people listening who may not need to break free from a restrictive community, but there are broken relationships, maybe even a broken relationship with their parent, like you've described here.
Yeah.
What have you learned that you can pass on to the rest of us? Well,
the basic thing that I've learned is that it's like I said, to go seek forgiveness for someone, focus on your own flaws instead of them. If you come accusing, Dad, you were harsh on me and I'm bitter and broken about that, it's not going to work, because that's going to make them reactive. And I'm not talking just about that's the general human thing. So when you seek reconciliation, redemption, whatever, just make sure that your heart is where it needs to be, and you don't have to worry about everybody else being what you think they should be, because that's really not your business.
And in conclusion, is there any Bible passage that really has guided you in this process?
Yeah, I would say so. Various ones, but the one that I have really latched onto, and especially after the first book came out, was seek the Lord and His path or His ways, and He will grant you the desires of your heart. And I guess that could be taken wrong, the desires of your heart. If your heart is evil, you'll have bad desires, but if you desire the Lord, then He will make those desires right. And I feel that very strongly.
We'll put links to both of Ira's books about growing up Amish and reconciling with his father at firstpersoninterview.com. These first-person conversations are made possible by the Far East Broadcasting Company. It's no stretch to say that millions of people tune in each day to FEBC's programs, which are always heard in the local language in nearly 50 countries. The gospel is proclaimed and God's word is taught by indigenous broadcasters who love to serve their listeners. Take a few moments online to visit FEBC.org and learn more by watching a few of the videos which tell the stories. That's online at FEBC.org. FEBC, until all have heard. And don't forget to find our schedule online at firstpersoninterview.com. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us again next week for First Person.